Depending on your interest in the N64 version of Mother 3, you probably either look at this promotional render of some of the main characters and think, oh, these look cool, or, oh, these look jarring in comparison to the GBA version. And understandably so, to an extent. Mother 1, 2, and GBA Mother 3 are all sprite art based 2D games, while this is low poly 3D. However, personal opinions aside on if the Mother series quote unquote needs to be in 2D, there's always one contentious thing with most people regarding this render. It's that Boney looks weird. The dog is on crack, guys. He's seen some shit. The jokes get pretty old and repetitive real fast. But what I think is very important to point out is that this is not how he was going to look like in the game. Comparing him to how he looks here in in-game shots, look, his eyes look normal and aren't going in different directions. But the question is, why does this promotional render look like this? Well, I contacted a friend known for being an N64 era modeler and Donkey Kong aficionado named Retro64. He's been working on a recreation of Boney's model from EarthBound 64, so I've asked him to provide a technical explanation of what's going on in that render of Boney, and here's what he had to say.
Thanks for having me on, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here. Anyways, the situation with Boney can be explained pretty easily. It seems that it is using a different type of animation on the model known as vertex animation. Now, what is vertex animation, and why did it cause Boney's eyes to look the way they do in this render? Well, vertex animation is when instead of a model being rigged using a bone set to create an animation skeleton, the animator physically animates the actual vertices that are being used to construct the model. This allowed for much greater control over the model to allow for more expressive and cartoony animation because of the freedom it allowed. The most famous example of vertex animation in gaming can be seen in the Crash Bandicoot trilogy on PS1. However, it could also be done on the N64, as seen in Conker's Bad Fur Days cutscenes, where the vertex animation was used for things like mouth lip syncing, while everything else was handled by typical bone animation. Keep this animation mixture idea in mind. Now, you might be asking, what does this have to do with Boney? Well, if you take a good look at Crash's eyes in the first game, you can see that they are modeled quite similarly to Boney's, being large, cartoony white eyes with modeled out pupils. And while it is hard to notice, there are some scenes in the infamous Space World EB64 trailer where you can see Boney's pupils move around, showing that they are most likely using vertex animation, whilst everything else is using typical bone animation. Now, the thing with vertex animation is, much like a normal rigged model, they have a base rest pose to use as an interpolation point. When making one of these, you want everything to be as neutral as possible. Does this ring any bells? In case not, let's look at Crash's rest pose from the first game. Now, would you look at that? The same strange looking wide-eyed stare. Especially since in every other screenshot of Boney, we can see his eyes don't look like this, I can almost guarantee that the iconic promotional render actually just forgot to pose Boney's eyes from its rest pose. Here's an example of what it would look like going between my own recreation model's rest pose and his neutral idle state. Looks a lot better, right? Now, how did this mistake happen? That I'm not actually sure. My best guess is that they were afraid to physically edit the model in whatever software they were using to make it, worrying that they could have accidentally saved over it and or messing up the rest pose. On actual hardware, the model is stored in said rest pose and has the location of the vertices stored separately, so they can move around but always go back to the rest pose when needed. Just posing a model on a computer for a render most likely wouldn't have had this luxury of separate storage, so they could have been worried about changing it, and if affecting the rest pose, completely messing up the animations that were built off it. Or maybe they just forgot. Who knows? All that's important is that no, Boney did not actually look like this in-game, and that his eyes were most likely just a silly little error regarding vertex animation. Funnily enough, Boney having vertex animation means he could have been one of the most impressive and expressive characters in the game due to the freedom it allows on his eyes for animation. We just haven't seen enough actual footage to see this in action. What could have been. Anyways, that's all from me. Thanks for having me on, Jonathan. See ya, everybody.
Gee, thanks Retro64. Well, there's your technical explanation. If after hearing that you still may think in your head, EarthBound 64 looked like shit, I think you might just not like the game for the sake of not liking it. I don't know. Eyes aside, I honestly, from objective of a standpoint as I can possibly try and say this from, I do not think N64 Boney is a bad design. At the end of the day, personal preference is personal preference, and everyone is free to enjoy or not enjoy EarthBound 64's character designs. However, if you're gonna say something like, this looks bad, please explain. Why does it look bad? This obviously doesn't just apply to N64 Boney, but in general, actually having valid reasoning why you don't think something looks very good will go a long way, just saying. Although I do have to say, if you didn't know, it's very likely he was intentionally modeled after Slinky Dog from Toy Story. Does Slinky Dog have a bad design? No, and Boney isn't any different, in my opinion. He's a very good little puppy that deserves love. And you know, yeah, I can see the point maybe that his buck tooth looks dumb and goofy, but like, I think that was the point. Boney is, what a lot of people seem to fail to recognize, the much needed comic relief of Mother 3. I think it's pretty smart in your story having the dog be the comic relief in your character-driven narrative. He's just a dog. Or a dog-like dude. And that's all he ever has to be. Maybe in terms of design, Boney's Smash Ultimate model is cuter, but it doesn't make N64 Boney any less valuable to me. And that's about all I have to say regarding debunking N64 Boney. The moral is, don't judge a book by its cover, or in this case, don't judge a game and its art style off of a singular promotional render. By the way, I've started a Ko-fi page. If you enjoy my content, here's an opportunity to help support me and help support the creation of future content from me. Thank you all very much, and have a good day.